a massive game tonight in the NFL. It's the Commanders and the Eagles squaring off in Philly. We've got the home team, like 3.5 points. Total sitting at 48.5. Before we get into this game, do you think there are any futures bets that you need to place before? Because I think when you have these big, massive games with huge implications, both for the division and the conference, this is where maybe you can get some value in playing that side of the coin as opposed to, the actual game. Because I think the question mark for me is, we've talked about the Commanders and saying, okay, maybe it's going to be an uphill climb for them to win the division. But let's look at the Eagles for a second. The Eagles are plus 550 to win the NFC. That is tied for the second shortest odds. The lines are plus 185. Do you think there's any value on the Eagles there? It feels like this is kind of a statement game. Like if the Eagles go out and win this one big, I feel like it kind of makes a statement. Do you think this number moves?
It's the only issue with winning the entire NFC versus the NFC East is that they've got to get through the Lions. And listen, I'd still argue, despite the fact they've still dealt with injuries, I'm not ready to count the 49ers out once we get to the playoffs either, because I trust the 49ers and their coaching staff in the playoffs more than I trust the Eagles and their coaching staff in the playoffs. NFC East winner today, obviously no value in the Eagles minus 275 and the Commanders plus 180. So you're sitting in a spot here where for me personally, I don't trust the Eagles to win the NFC. I don't trust the Commanders to win the NFC. We're not there yet. But what I would do is I would consider Dan Quinn at 5-1 to win Coach of the Year. This is something you and I kind of like dabbled in a little bit yesterday, because look at it like this. If the Commanders win tonight, Dan Quinn's odds are going to shorten to win Coach of the Year without question. They've got a chance to win the division. If they lose tonight, he's most likely not going to be in contention for Coach of the Year, because you're going to have to deal with Dan Campbell. I know people probably won't vote for Nick Sirianni, but it's there. There's a lot of other teams in the NFC Tomlin that could be thrown into the mix. Mike Tomlin's certainly going to be in the mix there, because you don't have to look at just the NFC. You're obviously looking at everybody across the board. So to me, this is kind of the do or die for Dan Quinn to stay in Coach of the Year contention here. And if you're looking at a price that's sitting around 5-1, he's either going to be knocked out of contention after this game with a loss, or the odds are going to shorten and you're not going to get the same price, not as good of a price, if they win, because it's now going to accelerate them into the possibility of winning the division. So to me, the one future that I would kind of dig in on before tonight, even if it's opposed to, if you think the Commanders can win tonight, maybe bet Dan Quinn Coach of the Year as part of it, or as, instead of money line, if you want to go that route and get something like a bigger price. They've still got a lot of a schedule left to go here, but I think that there's an opportunity there for belief in Dan Quinn and the Commanders winning the division. Don't bet the division at plus 180 for the Commanders. Bet Dan Quinn Coach of the Year at 5-1.
Okay, so I'm going to make the case for the Eagles on the other side to win the NFC, because you're right, going through the Lions is certainly going to be a tough match. But if you bet the Eagles to win the NFC at plus 550, if they get there, you have one side of the equation at plus 550. There are a lot of good hedging opportunities, because that's half the battle when it comes to the futures market, is setting yourself up for good hedging opportunities. Because here's the thing. If they believe the Eagles are going to win the NFC East, what are they, minus 275, something like that? The home field advantage for the Eagles is really good. If they get, home games in the postseason, I think they are put in a very good spot in the postseason. And plus, if they are trending in the right direction, it feels like everybody is kind of shouting at me, the Eagles are going to win this game. The Eagles are healthy. Because from a betting standpoint, it looks like all of the quote unquote smart people I follow are on the Eagles tonight. I feel like you could make a really good case for them, even if it's them and the Niners. I do think it's going to be the Lions that probably win the NFC. But again, hedging opportunities, I think, are there for the Eagles. And I do think this price moves if they make a statement tonight. So the question is, let's stop speaking in hypotheticals. Do they make a statement tonight? Or is it the Commanders? Because we haven't given a side in this game.
Yeah, I said at the beginning of the week, I actually do think the Eagles cover and win in this game. I mean, we moved from a 3 to a 3.5. Washington could keep this thing maybe within a field goal. They've done a good job of keeping really every game close. The Ravens game, they lost by 7. I had the Commanders at plus 7, so at least there was a push there. They tend to be a team that covers and plays well in these games that really, really matter for them, despite what happened, obviously, against the Steelers last week. That was still a game where they were really competitive. A couple of Steelers mistakes, that was a part of it. But the Eagles coming off of a big win in Dallas. I know Dak Prescott wasn't out there. I know it wasn't the same Cowboys team, and I know the sun got in CeeDee Lamb's eyes. But the reality of it is, if you're the Eagles, to go down and beat a division rival at home and beat the hell out of them, I mean, just club them in their home stadium, that's on a short week, sticks in your mind. Now they're going back home. They're riding that momentum. You've got the fan base back behind you. You know Eagles fans want to do everything they can to just make things loud and obnoxious for Jaden Daniels. I like the Eagles. Listen, it pains me as a Commanders fan to say this. I think the Eagles win this game. I think the Eagles cover. I like the Eagles -3. I said at the beginning of the week. I didn't bet it, but it was one thing I gave out and said, look, I think it's probably going to be at least an Eagles cover here in this spot. Washington on the road can make this competitive, make it close. I think the Eagles get up early and Washington has to play from behind.
I think if you look at their schedule and you look at the Eagles, I've said this before, it feels like the Eagles have beat up on a bunch of bad teams. Like if you look at this recent stretch where they're putting together these really good numbers, they've done it against the Cowboys, the Jags, the Bengals, that's a good win, in my opinion, the Giants, and the Browns. But if we're playing the game of like, who have you played? What's the Commanders' signature win? I was just looking at this because it feels like it's kind of the same story for the Commanders. Like, what's their moral victory? Keeping it close with the Ravens, keeping it close with the Steelers. So when the line's only 3.5, I think that's where it's tricky. Like, if you were giving me, 6 points with the Commanders here, maybe I'd be interested. But what is the Commanders' biggest win this year? Like, how have they fared against top-end competition? I think that is my question.
And I think that's a great point, and that kind of goes back to, again, why I'm still as excited as I am about this season and what they've turned into in terms of, like, the development. You haven't had, like, honestly, I'm looking at this list here right now. The Bengals, we know offensively, are a really good team. Like, we know what they can do, at least offensively, right? Could we argue, even though they weren't the same team, because it's hard to compare early in the season to later, the Commanders won 42-14 at the Cardinals. The Cardinals are one of the surprise teams this year. I did bet the over on their win total. The Rams last year, their win total was one of my favorite futures bets. The Cardinals are in that category for me this year where I felt like they were undervalued given what Kyler Murray can do when he's actually healthy. So maybe the argument is, putting aside moral victories, right, like covering against the Ravens and only losing by a point to the Steelers, is it the Cardinals and that big win at Arizona? But Arizona's gotten better as things have trended on. So I think that's tough. I think you bring up a good point where you look at for a signature win for Washington, and the signature win would be over the Bears, but that was based on a Hail Mary, and their offense really looked stagnant the entire time. They couldn't do anything in the red zone.
Yeah, and also I think that the home field advantage actually plays a factor here. I think in the NFL it's getting increasingly moot, where you see these road teams that will go in and cover. I think if there's ever a spot where the home field actually matters, it is Philadelphia.